It's the woke blame game and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is Garrick Ross, and we have Warren Miller. So it's the boomers and the millennial, basically.
Garrick and the boomers.
That's right, Garrick and the boomers.
Another fine addition.
And of course, we have Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Katora, our producer. So this podcast is called the Woke Blame Game, and the dumbest bill in America. And first up, we have Michael Goodwin, the writer of the New York Post, says that Democrats need to recruit Obama to bench Biden and find another candidate. So, in other words, bench Biden, maybe recruit Obama, or find another candidate, like maybe Andrew Cuomo. And we've talked about this briefly, and so have some others. But I think actually they might be really looking at this seriously now. I really do, because Biden has completely evaporated from the news. So I'm just curious what you guys think about this. The boomer versus the millennials. I
think this is about as serious an effort as getting Trump out at the convention in 2016 was. I don't think anything will come of it.
Really?
I can't see the Democratic Party going to such lengths to get their establishment candidate in over Bernie at the last second and then just kick him to the can at the first second they get.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I have some agreement with that. I think in reality, to get a different candidate, to have a broker convention, you have to get to a second ballot. And you have to remember a lot of these states, I think even the Democrats, when they do their primaries, they lock in those delegates that go for Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be very hard on that first ballot for Joe Biden not to win a plurality to vote.
Good point.
Unless he has a heart attack or there's some reason to break those committed delegates away. And the only way you can broker convention is to have to go to a second ballot.
At least on the Democrat side, right?
On both sides.
On both sides, okay.
But I think one of the conversations that is going to take place when I believe Biden inevitably loses, just because of incumbency and a lot of other factors. But you're going to see a lot of Democrats wondering who should we have drafted instead of Biden, because similar to in 2012, how a lot of candidates on the Republican Party didn't run and bowed out. Like a lot of people said Christie's prime would have been the 2012 election, and that he should have ran then because he was America's darling then. You're going to see somebody like Cuomo, who you mentioned people want to draft. You're going to see him be talked about in the news as somebody who probably should have run and missed their window.
Of course, you're talking about the Rhino Christie, since you're from New Jersey, you know?
Oh,
an ardent
supporter of Trump. The first one to endorse.
Give
credit where it's due.
Yeah, this is true. But look, I think that Cuomo is positioning himself with the possibility, because of all of these press conferences he's been having. I mean, he needs to have the press conferences. I'm not saying that he shouldn't have them, but just the way he's talking in general and positioning himself, and who has evaporated from the news is Biden. And now it's all about Cuomo and it's all about Trump.
Sanders, too. I haven't heard much from Sanders.
Well, and the interesting thing is you also have somebody like Gavin Newsom. You have 50 governors in the U.S., and every day, all 50 are probably doing press conferences.
Yep.
Good point.
But the only person getting the national attention are the president and Andrew Cuomo. You don't hear Larry Hogan. You don't hear Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is the most populous state in the U.S.
Yes.
And they've got problems just like New York. They're not far behind.
They've actually done a very good job. Like in terms of exponential growth, they have kept their rate of increase relatively low. They being
low. Who? Gavin Newsom?
The state of California as a whole.
Okay.
Whether you want to credit that to Newsom or localities and things like that.
Really surprising. I mean, to your theory, Mark, it's really surprising that they're not moving the national media around to different governors to give them the spotlight.
It's all
stuck on Cuomo, and they give him an hour, 2 hours. And they're not giving Biden that deference.
And he's a good speaker. I think one of the things that people like about Trump is that he's very real and he just kind of says things. I think Cuomo it's that New Yorker presentation.
Sure.
You just kind of get up there and he just talks.
In your face.
He's in your face, and he's honest, and he'll tell you how it is, whether you like it or not. And I think that does appeal to a lot of people.
And that's my thought process, is maybe the Democrat Party and the Democrat constituencies are watching these press conferences and thinking, why isn't he our nominee?
Oh, I've seen it all over Twitter, social media. It's something largely talked about. It's like, why didn't we ever think about Cuomo? Why do we put up a lifeless Joe Biden?
And the woke blame game, how, of course, Cuomo constantly blamed Trump for not having enough ventilators. And meanwhile, they were in the warehouse because the federal government had already shipped them. And Cuomo's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, we knew they were there. We're not going to take them out until we actually need them. But he's been whining for literally a couple of weeks about this.
He wants 10 times what's in the warehouse and doesn't have the need.
Right, it doesn't have the need. And then what are we supposed to do? beg Cuomo for the rest of the country because now he has all of the ventilators. It's just ridiculous. And this is part of the woke blame game that we're talking about this podcast. And the New Orleans mayor, same thing, woke blame game.
Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, there's another one. She was going on in the news. She accused the president and Pence of not giving her procured supplies because she wasn't nice to them or anything. But then goes out in the news yesterday and backtracks that whole assertion. She just basically says, "Oh no, it's not that. It's really that we're just competing with so many localities around the world to get these supplies, and we can't
resources.
For resources,
because we don't make anything anymore."
But they just went right to blaming the federal government.
If you're in a state that needs the support of the federal government, the stupidest thing you can do is to criticize the federal government.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And much to the president's point, you're not criticizing just the president. Everybody thinks they're being partisan and cute and woke, and they can say whatever they want about the president. You're criticizing FEMA. You're criticizing the military, the National Guard, all the people you have to rely on for support in your time of crisis.
A very partisan establishment.
And if you turn that second tier of people off, if you get them upset with you,
why would they help you?
You can guarantee you're not going to get a good response,
Exactly.
and it is going to go to other places. So it's stupidity beyond belief. I've seen governors of local states do this when they get their mic time.
Yep.
And it's beyond offensive.
And you're criticizing NIH, and you're criticizing the Surgeon General, and you're criticizing all the healthcare providers at the national level that you need to help you through this crisis.
And you get a lot of these like Monday morning quarterbacks, governors or politicians who think they just know better. Like if Dr. Anthony Fauci or Dr. Birx gets up there and says something and it's not with what your preconceived political notion is, Fauci and Birx aren't wrong. You're wrong.
Exactly. So the New Orleans mayor says she would have canceled Mardi Gras if the feds had taken coronavirus more seriously. She would have canceled it, she says. Of course, this is in retrospect now that New Orleans is a hotspot in the United States of America for the virus. Not that that's a surprise, because if you've ever been to Mardi Gras or if you've just been to New Orleans and you've seen how people congregate in the bars, they're always packed. And of course, you're hitting into people when you go up to a bar to get a drink. Even when you're walking through the corridors, you're hitting into people.
And you're touching people, the beads, you're coming up to people, you're socializing, you're hugging. It's a very intimate holiday.
Are you saying that you've had...
I've been to New Orleans once or twice,
You've been holding
Mark.
beads, you bought some beads, is that what you're saying?
Okay, maybe.
But that's what she said, and we actually have a clip from her, and this is the woke blame game, and here it comes. Here she is.
When it's not taken seriously at the federal level, it's very difficult to transcend down to the local level in making these decisions. In hindsight, if we were given clear direction, we would not have had Mardi Gras, and I would have been the leader to cancel it.
Sure. She had no information, is what she's saying.
President of the United States canceled all travel from China in January and was roundly criticized by just about every Democrat. And I'm sure if you go back and look, she may have even criticized him because it was ridiculous that he was canceling travel. And if that didn't give her a clue, I'm not sure what you could do to kind of get her with reality to realize that having the Mardi Gras is the reason she has the problems she has
Mardi
now.
Gras was the first week of March, right?
And
Great point.
She owns the blame for this.
Do you remember Katrina, though? Do you remember Katrina? They're trying to turn this into a Katrina because that's
Trump's
where...
Katrina?
That's exactly what they're trying to do. The same city that had school buses that could have evacuated people out of the city, hundreds of them,
And left them in a
but
parking
instead they left them in a parking lot flooded, is the same city that's now saying, we had no idea this virus was going to be so serious.
We all knew by at least mid-February that this was a big deal. Mardi Gras was in March. People had been canceling festivals and things well before Mardi Gras ever happened. South by Southwest, Coachella, the whole nine. So this wasn't something that just popped up one day in the beginning of March and people were just caught off guard.
Exactly. So Politico, it's a pretty good online magazine. Talk about how de Blasio's coronavirus crisis. I know you guys have read this article, but just to talk a little bit about de Blasio, because he is the ultimate blame game kind of guy.
He is the worst human being
He really is.
imaginable.
I mean, the article just gives one example after another how de Blasio dropped the ball and then literally decided to blame people. Telling people to go out and go to restaurants and spend money.
He was going to the YMCA during the thing, working out in gyms, being like unprepared. His staff is ready to revolt against him for his lack of helpful work habits and things.
He's the one that had the health officer in New York that insisted the Lunar New Year festival go, and that was outraged by the president closing travel because they wanted lots of people from China
Yes.
to come to New York City for this festival.
They were trying to be so woke and so intimate and things like that they just got rid of all common sense because screw Trump, how could he ever be right about anything? And again, this is another one. It's not like this popped up one day. This has been an ongoing issue that he just looked at and he said, no, you guys are just wrong.
It is. It's really sad because you can see how important it is for various levels of government to work with one another. Cities working with states, states working with the federal government, counties, of course, working with the state. But here's an example where two individuals from the same party, namely de Blasio and Cuomo, the governor, and de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, aren't working together at all because they don't like each other either, apparently.
Oh, no.
And as you said, his entire staff, de Blasio's staff, doesn't like him either.
De Blasio is like the most unpopular mayor in the United States. He just happens to be a D in a very D area and gets the benefit of the doubt.
And he wanted to be president. I mean, imagine this guy can't even manage the city.
Yeah, they had to guilt him into dropping out of the race to get him to go back to take care of the city during all of this, too. He is something.
And also in Politico, we have the coronavirus is the moment Andrew Cuomo has prepared for his whole life. That's the story's title, which I think, of course, there you go. Because we talk about how Cuomo might want to one day be president or might want to replace Biden. Well, now we have articles kind of intimating this. And we have a clip where Cuomo's talking at one of his press conferences and quite frankly, does a pretty good job. He does. In this particular clip, and we're playing this to be fair, to see so that you can hear, the podcast listeners can hear how he is positioning himself to run for president. At least I think. And here is the clip.
Last point. It is about the vulnerable. It's not about 95% of us. It's about a few percent who are vulnerable. That's all this is about. Bring down that anxiety, bring down that fear, bring down that paranoia. It's not about 95% of us. And we're going to get through it because we are New York and because we've dealt with a lot of things and because we are smart. You have to be smart to make it in New York. And we are resourceful and we are showing how resourceful we are. And because we are united. And when you are united, there is nothing you can't do. And because we are New York tough. We are tough. You have to be tough. This place makes you tough. But it makes you tough in a good way. We're going to make it because I love New York. And I love New York because New York loves you. New York loves all of you. Black and white and brown and Asian and short and tall and gay and straight. New York loves everyone. That's why I love New York. It always has, it always will. And at the end of the day, my friends, even if it is a long day, and this is a long day, love wins. Always. And it will win again through this virus. Thank you.
So he did a pretty good job there. But I did want to break out in song like Barney. I love you, you love me. That's what it sounded like. But, it's interesting. Here's a guy talking about his compassion, but meanwhile signed a bill that allows there to be abortion on demand all the way up until and after a baby is born. But yet he is so woke that he really cares about the elderly and the weak. But he's also the same guy who in 2015 decided that when his health officers with federal stimulus money at that time said we should use some of this money to buy things in case of a pandemic, he said, I don't think so. Let's cut that way, way back. And we'll just go through triage and decide, who should live and who should die if we don't have enough equipment. This is the same guy that did that. Very well and reported throughout the media and all different kinds of channels. I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
You know who else does late-term abortion or abortion on birth?
Who?
For population control? The People's Republic of China.
Oh, gosh, you're right.
So why do I want to live in China? For the same reason I don't want Andrew Cuomo to be president.
Well said.
But, the media will run
Well
cover for him. I mean, like you said, this is a Politico article, but I could count at least probably on two hands how many different articles I've seen in the last couple of weeks about how Andrew Cuomo is the second coming of, baby Jesus himself.
He is, right, according to the media. The woke media.
I think it's also that people want this leader, this person to be an embodiment. I think with Trump, the dynamic of campaigning has changed. It's not about policy or experience or anything like that. It's about how good can you be on TV. It is the TV presidency these days, and I think Cuomo is pretty much the good embodiment of that, and a politician looking to project himself going forward.
Absolutely. Now, it's really fascinating because, look, as I said, we're giving him kudos, Cuomo, because it did sound good and it did sound compassionate, and that is important. And you need to establish calm amongst, especially a large city like New York City and a big state like New York State.
And to Trump and Cuomo's credit, despite some of the bickering that goes on between the two of them, I do largely think that they've done a good job in coordinating. And, whatever Cuomo's asked for, Trump has done a very good job in being like, hey, okay, fine, here. Like he sent the HMS Comfort up to the Hudson. It's an extra 2,400 hospital beds. It alleviates a lot of the hospital congestion. And Trump has been a pretty good leader in being willing to work with all these states and giving them basically whatever they want so long as they ask for it.
But at the same time,
to Cuomo.
At the same time, the Trump administration has had to fact check a lot of the things that Cuomo has said to go back to the media and say, no, actually, what we said at the Trump press conference is so, and what he's telling you isn't so. And then the media fact checks, and then finally, they put aside these differences.
He spent a good 20 minutes going back and forth with two reporters at his press conference yesterday. This is Trump, by the way. Concerning that statement that we read earlier, where Warren, you touched on it, where the president's saying, you're not insulting me, you're insulting FEMA and the hardworking people who are trying to help you get through this. And a bunch of journalists kept coming up to him and being like, why are you withholding aid from states who aren't happy for you? And he's like, that's not what I said. He's like, this is what I said. Read the whole quote. And they read the whole quote and he goes, exactly. This is what I'm getting at. And he still has to go through these motions every time, even though it's pretty painful.
He kind of intimated it too, though, that he was tired of being criticized by these people and tired of the misinformation, which, quite frankly, when I heard him say that, I actually didn't blame him. Because if you're doing it, look, this man doesn't drink Trump and he doesn't smoke.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We already know what his main vice is. And and so what drives him is work. He loves to work. And my understanding is he gets up at 4 a.m. and he doesn't go to bed until basically,
People were so shocked to see him tweeting at 4:30 in the morning, and they just didn't understand. He gets up at 4, he works till like 10 at night, he goes to sleep, does it all over again.
Exactly. Yeah. No hangover because the man doesn't drink. So Congressman Haley, by the way, this is not Nikki Haley. This is a Democrat congresswoman from Michigan. Congresswoman Haley basically, during the stimulus, $2.2 trillion stimulus debate, loses her mind on the House floor. Loses her mind. And we have a clip on this. I don't know. If you're listening, you gotta kind of figure out what she's saying, because it sounds like she's literally, someone needs to take her and have her evaluated by a mental health professional. Here she is. Here's the clip.
We beam for our manufacturers who have no... I request 30 more seconds because I rise before you adorning
the
these...
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Not for personal attention. Not for personal attention, but to encourage you to take
gentleman,
this to
every American
I'm give you more time. Right now, to the families...
The gentlelady will suspend. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized. The gentlelady is out of order.
I yield the gentlelady 30 additional seconds.
The gentlewoman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Cause of their servitude, sharing in the profession with those who have not come before you. Similar times of trying medical need, wars and flus pass. You will see darkness. You will be pushed, and our society needs you to stand together at this time. Our country loves you. To our doctors and our nurses, I wear these latex.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland is reserved. The gentleman from Texas is recognized. The gentleman from Texas is now recognized. The gentlelady from Michigan is out of order.
Wow. Incredible.
The gentlelady from Michigan is out of order. The gentlelady from Michigan is no longer recognized. The gentlelady from Michigan is no longer recognized.
So we played that entire clip for you just to show you and to demonstrate how crazy some of these congressmen and women are. And apparently, this isn't the first time Congresswoman Haley has gone crazy. Apparently, this is normal. What are you people thinking in Michigan, voting her in? I mean, what do you guys think?
Record of representatives up there in Michigan.
Well, what I want to know is what's the speaker think about this? Because when you set up a debate about any bill, you have a time limit per speaker. You're allotted so much time, 30 seconds, a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
That's a great
and
point.
Everybody knows to follow the rules. And this is obviously somebody that has an issue with following the rules of the speaker. So where is Nancy Pelosi in controlling this woman?
Agreed.
And here's somebody that's making, what is it, $250,000 a year to be a U.S. congressperson? I don't know what their salary is these days.
Yeah, I think it's close
It's
to
up there.
Yeah, I think it's up there, close to 2.
And I couldn't discern a coherent word out of all that except something about the darkness.
You're going to see darkness.
We're going to see darkness.
Threw me for a loop there.
I mean,
Yes.
is she threatening us? I mean, I'm not clear on what the meltdown was all about, but she's clearly not effective for her citizens.
No.
I don't think anybody can take her seriously after that, even in her own party.
Agreed.
And I think this is a problem that Nancy Pelosi has let fester, and Nancy Pelosi is directly accountable for allowing this woman to speak on this very critical bill.
She cut a deal with the devil to be speaker for the second time, and it has not served her well because it has let a lot of people walk all over her and basically ignore her power and created a very interesting schism in the Democratic Party. And this is just an example of it.
So let me ask you a question. Can't you, if you're Speaker of the House, can't you call out the Sergeant of Arms and have the person removed?
Absolutely.
You can censure them too. You can refuse to seat them. You can do a whole bunch of things.
You can refuse to acknowledge them to speak. And that's the whole thing. Not every Democrat, not every Republican spoke on this bill. I guarantee you it was a limited few. So
makes you wonder, though, if Nancy knew this stunt was coming and just let it happen. But
how does that help them? I don't think that helps them.
I don't know.
It makes them look wacky.
It was weird because I like to watch Twitter sometimes and just see what people talk about because it's I believe, a very left-leaning echo chamber for a lot of different issues. And a lot of people were like, yeah, we should all be really angry like Congresswoman Haley was about what's going on. Like a lot of young people are very angry about the federal government and they see somebody going in there and yelling and saying that everybody's doing a terrible job, but thank you to our nurses and doctors, which is what I think she was talking about. I can't really tell you. I didn't hear any of it. So it made no sense to me. But there are a lot of people who are angry who kind of aspies with the sentiment that she does.
So the media latched onto this guy from Tennessee who happened to be a Republican congressman that wanted a roll call vote on the bill.
Thomas Massey from Kentucky.
Now, he was standing on principle.
Yes.
He was standing on the Constitution principle. He wanted a roll call vote.
I disagree with the principle, but at least at the end of the day, he's very consistent with his ideological
but a principle nonetheless.
value.
Yes. He's standing on principle. And for as much as they may have impacted the bill, he got all the publicity.
Yes.
Where was the Main Street media covering this woman's rant?
Well, they were angry at her for 2 minutes until AOC went right after her.
Yeah, but you had to dig. This was not.
That's
you
a good
couldn't
point.
find this in CNN.
Yeah.
Rachel Maddow isn't talking about this woman.
Rachel Maddow probably thought it was the best thing she's ever seen.
Well, I'm just saying it just shows you how distorted the media is.
Oh yeah.
And how partisan they are.
It serves this whole rant. It serves no purpose. I mean, so you're going out there and you're fear-mongering and you're telling people the world's going to come to an end. What purpose does this serve as a leader?
It sounds like some of the climate change gibberish that I've heard over the past few years. And look, it to me, it means less to me about whether you do believe or don't believe that the climate is changing at an extreme level, like the climate change people think, in as much as I think that people like Congresswoman Haley have adopted climate change as a religion. And to them, it's a religious thing that's going on. And rather than look at the science of how coronavirus started, where it started from, the fact that you had this evil regime in charge that basically hid it from the world until it was too late. I mean, but instead, I really think that was what a lot of her rant was about climate change, because, she probably went to, some public school and some public college where they completely indoctrinated her. And now she's a congresswoman. And I really do believe this. I mean, we have a second clip from her. This is someone who doesn't believe in the Constitution. We'll prove it to you. Here's the clip.
And this is why the NRA has got to go! The NRA has got to go!
Yeah, so that's a sane person there.
What was the guy that ran for president that had that moment in New Hampshire?
Herb Dean.
Dean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Howard Dean.
Howard Dean.
Howard Dean. He was the former governor of Vermont.
It sounds like she's got some Howard Dean in her.
Yes, he does. He went, wow.
Yeah.
Then that was like, it was a meltdown. But
Yeah.
that shows you how crazy she is. She doesn't believe in the Second Amendment. I'm not sure what she believes in. But then you hear her supporters in the background, and they're like, yeah, the louder you yell, the better.
What did I tell you guys? There are really people out there who really think that this is something that they can relate to, and they love this kind of fiery energy. Now, personally, me, and I think 90% of America, all I want is a steady hand of leadership, somebody with some rational thought and, principle, just taking over and making sure we get through this A-okay, and giving me some hope that this is going to be okay when it's over, because once we kick the virus, this isn't where the train stops. We got to deal with the economic realities that are going to come on the other side of this, not some woman standing on the House floor screaming bloody murder over nothing.
I agree. I mean, I just think that actually Warren kind of summarized it really well, where you said Nancy Pelosi just needs to talk to this individual.
Yeah, if she's the speaker, if she runs the body, and if these Democrats adhere to her leadership, this should never happen.
It should never, ever happen. Completely agree.
Never would have happened under John Boehner.
That's right. So next up in the New York Post, there is an opinion article, Woke Stupidity is Spreading as Fast as the Coronavirus Pandemic. Woke Stupidity is Spreading, which this is really funny. And it's written by Kyle Smith. It's a really well-written article. And they cite, how these Hollywood types in particular are tweeting and giving quotes and doing other things about the coronavirus pandemic that really have nothing to do with anything. For one, Fran Drescher, she used to have her own TV sitcom, Fran Drescher, and she tweeted, "The heart of the problem, all the problems with the world at its core, is power and greed fueled by capitalism. Time for a new deal." What? I mean, I thought this came from communism, this particular virus, but she says the problem is capitalism?
Capitalism, the ideology that allowed you to make millions of dollars.
Can I tell you my favorite, Mark?
And she's wealthy. Yeah, what? I want to hear this.
So if everybody saw Fast Times at Ridgemont High, they're all familiar with Spicoli.
Yes.
Also known as Sean Penn.
Yes.
Who apparently in his afterlife is now a national security preparedness expert on CNN.
Oh, he is a lunatic.
He had all the answers for what we should be doing with this pandemic. Now, how you go from being Spicoli at Fast Times at Ridgemont High to an expert on anything, and I mean, I'm not even going into his life after that role, but he's had a very colorful life, and not for the right reasons.
Yeah,
not for the right reasons.
A lot of publicity for a lot of very bad things.
The article also goes on to quote Britney Spears, the famous pop star who shared a meme on Instagram calling for a general strike that was decorated with rose emojis symbolizing the international socialist cause. And she writes, "We will feed each other, redistribute wealth, and strike." My understanding is that she's worth $250 million. She can give her money up anytime she wants. Why is she waiting for us?
The legacy of Karl Marx is in great hands, Mark.
Yes, with Britney Spears.
She will take them to the promised land.
So the next one, by the way, in the same article, a former Colorado congressional candidate named Sarah Rao, who has 41,000 Twitter followers, wrote about friends who came down with COVID-19, and the explanation was simple, according to her. She says, quote, "White people decided that they loved white supremacy more than life itself. Hence this." In other words, saying that coronavirus is occurring because of white supremacy. The most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because, oh, by the way, Boris Johnson, the famous leader of England has coronavirus.
Yes.
Mitt Romney, right? I mean,
Prince Charles.
Prince Charles. Prince Charles. I don't think that's white supremacy, just saying. I mean, but what a great op-ed there. It was really a lot of fun. So I don't know what you guys think about it. I'm hoping we hear more about these kinds of things.
It's good for a good laugh. I'm struggling to find entertainment being home all day, but these celebrities are giving it to me. So I hope they keep up on it.
So next up, we have this 3-tier thing we want to talk about. First about Airbnb, and then about their competitor, the direct competitor Marriott, and then about Turo, which is like Airbnb, but it's the Airbnb of cars. So first up, Airbnb. And the reason why we're talking about this is because all 3 of these companies have been affected, not just by competition, but by the coronavirus epidemic. So Let's talk about Marriott first, right? So imagine you're the CEO of Marriott. His name is Sorensen. His last name is Sorensen, the CEO of Marriott. And he says, this coronavirus is like nothing we've ever seen. He cut his salary to zero, and some of his executives cut their salaries in half. But the 92-year-old company has seen nothing like this because unlike past downturns like the Great Depression or the Great Recession, you still had some people staying in the hotels, but here's a situation where the hotels are literally shut down and no one can stay in the hotels.
Nobody's traveling, yeah.
They're not allowed to, apparently. And so he basically is like, well, what are we supposed to do? I mean, we went from some revenue to zero revenue. And not only that, but Airbnb competes with Marriott, and they were already being Airbnb wreaks havoc on Marriott. Why? Why don't you guys explain what Airbnb is?
So, like Uber,
Here comes the millennial, I'm just saying.
Yeah, Airbnb. You own private property. People go on an app and you can put it up there and say, you can stay at my house on your own for 2 nights and usually for a much discounted rate compared to a local hotel. And people like it because it's cheaper and you get a more homely space. For instance, hopefully I was planning on going to St. Thomas in July. We'll see if I go. But in order to save money, rather than renting, at a resort, we rented an Airbnb, and it was basically half the price for much
someone's
nicer
house, basically.
Somebody's condo.
So someone owns a house or a condo, and you got to rent a room.
You can rent the whole. Usually,
or
it's
the whole house.
It's the whole house usually.
Okay.
You get the whole space. It's usually for people who have excess property and want to get it out there, or they're seasonal. It's a good way. A lot of people do it from where I'm from. I'm from Jersey on the shore, and they'll rent their shore houses, and it's a good way to pay off your property taxes or things like that because it's excess income.
Which is interesting, right? Because Airbnb, which basically is a website connecting owners of homes with people who are looking at places to stay.
Yep.
Basically, Airbnb made no investment in bricks and mortar like hotels, but Marriott made nothing but investments in brick and mortar, and Airbnb is kicking Marriott's butt.
All Airbnb does is they skim a little off the top in a fee, and then the rest is an interchange between the two parties. And that's how they make their money.
And meanwhile, Airbnb, of course, is also losing hundreds of millions of dollars due to the pandemic. And the reason we're bringing these two up, because we have the same issue with this company called Turo. It's the Airbnb of cars. And this is a company that's basically going head to head with car rental companies like National Rent-A-Car and Enterprise Rent-A-Car. This company basically, it's a website just like Airbnb connecting owners of cars, like all of us, we all have a car, with people who are coming into a town who want to rent a car. Generally speaking, though, they're trying to rent like really high-end cars. You name the car that you're interested in, and in theory, you can advertise it on Turo, your car, and then someone will pay you to rent your car for a day or for a week or even for a month. And apparently, obviously, as you can imagine, all the car rental companies are upset at Turo. Very upset. So we have a clip on Turo. We're talking about this because this is the impact of competition, but also the impact of coronavirus on businesses. And we have a clip on Turo which explains the problem and the issue. And here it is.
Partly, but that's not really the core of Turo. I mean, our core mission is to enable people to monetize their cars. We've obviously run into the antagonism and the hostility from the rental car industry because they're not used to seeing competition.
It's kind of like what Airbnb dealt with the major hotel companies. There was a lot of pushback. In the case of Airbnb, the hotel companies were saying, well, we have to pay all these taxes, these fees, and Airbnb hosts, they don't have to do that. That's unfair. Is it a similar situation for you, especially when you have people renting at airports?
Yeah, there's absolutely the same situation for us.
Is it fair?
What they don't like to talk about is the significant tax subsidy they get because they actually don't have to pay any sales tax on any of the cars that they purchase for their fleet.
So it's interesting. So you hear, this is actually WSJ, Wall Street Journal, interviewing the CEO of Turo, which is the company that does peer-to-peer car renting, if you will. And it's just kind of interesting to see how you have all of these startups, and the startups are nothing more than websites connecting people together. And the startups are going to end up being bigger than companies like Marriott without actually owning a single hotel, or bigger than National Rent-A-Car, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, without actually owning a single car. It's incredible.
To be honest
just kind of what you guys think.
I'm a little skeptical of Turo as a concept. So I understand Airbnb, I understand Uber, because with Uber in the car and the ride sharing, so the owner of the car is still driving the car, and I think there's a difference with renting property compared to renting my car.
Right.
I think if I had a house, like a second house, and I had like a management service who went and checked on it after everybody left, I would be fine with that.
Okay.
I don't know how I feel about giving people the keys to my nice car to go driving around town.
Very personal.
With a lot of, it's very personal. There's a lot of different things that can happen and go wrong.
Sure.
Like accidents.
Someone smokes in it.
Yeah, a lot of different
And that never
things.
goes away when someone smokes in your car.
So I think, Toro might be affected in a couple of different ways, but I also think a lot of it is the idea. One of the things that I like to point out is you referred to it, Mark, as the Airbnb of cars.
Yes.
I think if any idea can be explained as the something else of something else, it doesn't work to me because I feel like you're just taking something that already exists and trying to fit it into another.
Millennials
genre.
are infamously, though, cheap and very good, I should say. And by the way, I admire that. They're very good at shopping online and getting the best deal. Yeah. I mean, this is like right down millennial alley, I think, because if they can save $50.
From my millennial perspective, though, I just think it's a little weird. Maybe I could be unique here.
You would rent a car, you just wouldn't rent your car to someone else.
To somebody else,
okay.
Yes.
I gotcha. Go ahead.
So these things are all called disruptive technologies. And we've dealt with them in Maryland in the legislature. And when Uber and Lyft first started, they didn't want to have a level playing field with the cab companies. So they didn't want liability for the drivers. They didn't want insurance. They didn't, we're a website. We don't have to deal with any of those things.
Right.
And they hit a rocky road. It took them 2 years to be legal in Maryland. And for good reason. I mean, for the same reason a cab driver, you need to have a background check and you need to do all these things. They're doing the same service.
Yeah.
And so when we look at Airbnb, there's been a whole secondary issue there of taxes.
Yes.
Because localities want tax money off these rentals, and Airbnb says, well, we're an internet company. There's no tax liability on our part.
Right. Yeah. It'd be
So
between
again,
the
that's
two
an issue that's come along with Airbnb.
It has.
And so now with Turo, one of their big problems is
car insurance, right?
Well, no. They want parking near airports and train stations.
Yeah.
And they've been told you can't park here.
That's right.
So they have to find alternate places. I don't even know if they're allowed in the fast park things near BWI. But again, the rental car companies, I'm sure, are behind it. But this adoption to market, this ability to make things truly easy for them, has not been going very well.
It is not.
So
it's a lot of regulatory hurdles.
They're hitting a really rocky road.
Even companies that have found a way to get everything squared away are still running into long-term hurdles. If you look at the California decision that in their superior court that is requiring Uber drivers to be classified as employees.
Right. Yes.
Uber, as opposed to gig employees, has had a significant hardship on their business
Can
model.
I just say something, though? It really bugs the heck out of me that you can own a home. It's your home. Right? And maybe you own it with a bank, like most of us do, and you have a mortgage and you're making mortgage payments. And then one day you decide, I'm going to rent out the basement because I've really fixed it up and it's really nice. And I'm going to put it on Airbnb. And then the state comes in and says, oh, we want to tax that. I'm like, well, what am I paying property taxes for?
Yeah.
Why am I paying property taxes for the house? And then I'm paying a separate sales tax that I have to remit to the state for renting what is my home.
Plus, you have to get permission from most of these places to rent to begin with.
Yes. Yes.
The government's always got its hand out.
Good point.
Always looking for another. Government's always got the handout, looking for more.
Exactly.
Wherever it can get it.
Kind of my libertarian side, but I would say the same thing with Toro. It's like if it's my car, my understanding is increasingly states are coming in and saying, we want to tax that transaction. Wait a minute. It's my car, at least mine in the banks. I'm making payments on the car. And then one of the reasons I'm renting the car through the website to other people is because it helps me pay my expenses on the car. And now the state's saying, oh, well, in addition to the tagging that we have to do every so often for your car and your registration fees and all that stuff that happens so often, we want to tax it.
And they'll try to explain this away as we're trying to close a tax loophole. It is not a tax loophole. If something was never intended to be taxed and the government shows up and says we want to tax it, it's not a loophole. It's just them implying a new tax.
Exactly. So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. It's the dumbest bill in America, and we have the lead up from Idiocracy. Here it goes.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops.
Yes.
Water. Like out the toilet?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be out of the toilet, but yeah, that's the idea. But Brondo's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
So that, of course, is from the infamous cult movie, Idiocracy, where you have a democracy gone awry and the dumbest people are running the country. Kind of sounds like some states that I know, but we're not going to go there. So the dumbest bill in America is, are you ready for this? You can't believe it. Sex ed for kindergartners. Sex ed for kindergartners, yes. Governor Jay Inslee
there's a familiar name.
Washington State. He was actually a presidential candidate until not too long ago. He has signed into law this legislation, which just passed, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and it provides, among other things, sex ed for kindergartners. He signed Senate Bill 5395, which mandates sex ed curriculum be available for instruction to students in grades 6 through 12, which is kind of what most people have seen over the past couple of decades. But then all grades, including kindergarten, beginning in the 2022 and 2023 school year. Including kindergarten, guys.
God.
Just saying.
In kindergarten, man, I was just playing with my blocks and wanted to be left alone.
So here's the thing. We have several short clips on this where there was a debate on the House floor in the state of Washington over this bill. And here, first up, is Representative Jenny Graham. She's a Republican, and she's, I don't know, just talking common sense about this bill. And here it is.
The one good thing that's coming out of this is that the parents are paying attention, and they are going to be sending a very loud and clear message, as they have been this entire time. These are our children. They don't belong to the government. They don't belong to the schools. These are our children, and we decide what they will or will not learn.
Yeah, they're our children. They're not, the children don't belong to, they're not wards of the state. So when they're in kindergarten, you don't get to basically, educate them or at least brainwash them about, I don't know, Me Too or other kinds of issues that don't belong in kindergarten. I don't know. Is it just me, guys? You're being awfully quiet. You're worrying me.
This harkens back to the People's Republic of China again. I understand Mao had an attraction to 11 and 12-year-olds.
Good.
And so the other thing I think about, it used to be, I think, child molesters stopped at middle school parking lots.
Yes.
You never see them in elementary school parking lots. Well, here's a reason for child molesters to be in elementary school parking lots.
Absolutely. Because you
man,
get to
if
teach.
I was a parent in Washington State and I had kids that weren't going to school or starting to go to school, I'd either be looking for private schools or moving the heck out of the state.
Absolutely.
I think given my millennial libertarianism in me, I don't believe it is the government's role to educate children on social issues stemming from these kinds of programs. It should really be up to the parent to determine when is the best time for me to educate my children on these types of issues. And a lot of this has to do with, different religious affiliations, and this isn't solely. It's so
well,
tough.
Here's an idea. It's a kindergartner.
Of course, yeah.
What the heck? I mean, as you said, you were playing with blocks in kindergarten. You were coloring in coloring books, and then suddenly the teacher's going to go, "Hey,
well, now you got to worry about what a consensual relationship is." And no offense, in kindergarten, I didn't know what the word consensual even meant. Too big for me.
And I'm not really sure it's a good word to learn at that particular point in time. But that's a parent's job.
The more we talk about this, the more things that pop into my head about how this is just so unapplicable. Like, how could you, like a Christian family or a Muslim family or a Jewish family or a secular family, how can you give all four of them the same kind of indoctrination based on, sexual ideology and preference based on
to a 5-year-old?
To a 5-year-old.
Yes.
It should be up to the parent to determine when is the appropriate age for them to learn this.
I would have to think that Oregon, Idaho, and Montana need to be ready with new schools.
Absolutely, including new private schools, which they probably already have. So here's Representative Monica Stonier. Of course, I want to say Stoner, but it's Stonier because she sounds like she's stoned. She actually is a supporter of the sex ed and kindergarten bill. And this is Monica Stoner talking about the bill to provide sex ed to kindergartners, 5-year-olds. Here it is.
That avoiding conversations about who we are, how our relationships work, and how our bodies work does far more harm than good. And I would say that the suicide rates in those teens are proof that that is the case.
Yeah, so she's saying, we shouldn't avoid talking about these issues and so forth. But first of all, who's the we? Right? I thought the we were the parents and the children, but she, of course, is, and she's very clever. She's very hyper-focused on teenagers because, this is part of the liberal and progressive ideology, which is to basically talk about the teenagers, but really that's not what the bill just does. The bill talks about people in kindergarten, which of course she avoids.
Indoctrination.
Indoctrination, 100%.
It's to teach these kids things that they're not being taught in their homes that should be appropriate for conversations between the parents and their kids. There's no role for the state and the school system to interject themselves in these conversations. And it's going to be, I think it's going to start to destroy the public school system.
Oh my gosh, I think the public school system in many states is already in great decline. And unfortunately, there's so many parents that are stuck in public schools who have to pay taxes and, of course, already for their houses and income taxes and so forth. And that funds public schools, depending on the state that you live in, on how they're funded. And then the parent at the end doesn't have school choice. So they're not given any kind of voucher or tax credit to be able to send their kid to private schools. So they're stuck in that really strange public school setting. So look, here is Representative Chris Gideon. Or it's Gidlon, excuse me. He's a Republican talking about the same bill. It's Chris Gidlon, he's a Republican from Washington State. He's on the House floor as they're debating the bill. He brings up a really good point, because we're talking about sex ed for kids as young as kindergarten all the way to 12th grade in public schools. It's mandated curriculum. And listen to what he talks about. Here's the clip.
That it's important, but it's not important enough to get periodic feedback from parents and community members across the state. I've learned that students are mature enough to learn about all aspects of sexual behavior, but they are not mature enough to learn about the realities of abortion.
Oh, so there you go. So apparently part of the sex ed curriculum will not be taught is abortion and the science of it, because we can't teach about the science of it because, that's just not what we do in public schools. We want to teach about the other stuff. I don't know. Just final thoughts on this, guys.
Indoctrination.
Absolute indoctrination.
Every case, but it is. And look, some people might be like, hey, if it's up to local school boards to develop the curriculum and how they teach it and things. With this bill, it is not the case. If you read the bill, they basically catty corner you into teaching specific topics to each grade. And when I first found this bill, I looked at it and I was like, oh, maybe it's teaching what you as a 5-year-old can expect to happen to you developmentally in the next 2 years. It is unrelated to that. It has so much more to do with a lot of these social topics that you hear about in the news or you hear about in college campuses and things, and trying to impart this on 5-year-olds.
The bill is completely prescriptive, because I read it as well. It's funny because the progressives said, oh no, each locality can kind of implement it the way they want to. It's not the way the bill's written at all. No. Because that's why the bill specifically says starting in kindergarten. Final thoughts on this, Warren?
It's just shocking how far we've come.
Between
the unions and these liberal groups imposing their will upon the curriculum, and the things kids have to learn from that in a lot of cases aren't even true. The curriculum is just plain wrong. There was a history thing my kids had to go through, and the founder of the American Communist Party was quoted as a well-known American historian. Mm-hmm. And he was imparting his communist view on America, which he hates. And when you see things like that in curriculum, when you see our tax dollars are being spent not to educate, not to teach fact, but to politicize and propagate propaganda, it's sickening. And it's not what this country was founded on. It should not be acceptable to anybody. And it should not be acceptable to Democrats. This is not, I'm not saying this is partisan. People that truly believe in America, the greatness of America, and want us to be a great country, we're losing on this education front because our kids are not being taught things that are relevant to our country.
Big time.
I learned growing up that the Liberal Party stood for freedom of idea, freedom of exploration,
critical thinking,
freedom of critical thinking. The whole Berkeley movement.
Not anymore.
Exactly, and this is what that bill does.
Absolutely,
this is a denigration of that philosophy.
Starting at age 5. Well, that's it. That's the last word, actually. That's it for Mark the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrett Ross and Warren Miller. Thank you very much for being here. And, of course, our producer, Adam Coutura, and our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.